Welcome to Dane Leask Adventures. In this adventure, I brought us to the British Columbia Aviation Museum. And this is located in Sydney, BC. I'm very excited to see the planes, see what they have, and learn about the history of aviation in British Columbia. I don't know much about it, but I know that planes were invented just before World War I. And then after World War I, a lot of the biplanes that were still around were used for other purposes. Like maybe instead of wheels, they would attach floats and they could use them as float planes to go to remote areas in British Columbia. So that's just speculation, but I'm sure we'll learn all about that. Hey, I'm here to see the planes.
Hey, yeah, that's what we got there, sir.
Sounds good to me. So this plane's called an Eastman Sea Rover. Oh, it was a floating boat. The Sea Rover was a flying boat designed and built by Jim Eastman and Tom Towle in Detroit during the late 1920s. Unfortunately, the Eastman Company failed due to the Great Depression, and Jim Eastman brought 5 of the aircraft out to the British Columbia and the Yukon to be used in mining exploration. This aircraft is the only remaining example of the 18 built by the Eastman Company and took museum volunteers 4 years and 18,000 hours to restore. Wow. It really is a flying boat. So this here is the Avro Aero. A lot of secrecy involved with the Avro Aero. It was pretty good for its time, and even today it would probably still be pretty good, but for whatever reason it was canceled and it was never actually finished. On the morning of February 20th, 1959, the day known to Avro Aero veterans as Black Friday, John Diefenbaker, Dief the Chief, addressed the House of Commons in what he called a somewhat lengthy statement on the subject of one facet of national defense of Canada. The government has carefully examined and re-examined the probable need for the Aero aircraft and Iroquois engine, known as the CF-105. The conclusion arrived at is that the development of the Avro Aero aircraft and Iroquois engine should be terminated now. Very suspicious circumstances. Fleet 2. The Fleet 2 is a tandem seat biplane built by Fleet Aircraft in Fort Erie, Ontario in 1930. The Fleet 2 is a robust, highly maneuverable aircraft that was used in British Columbia, primarily to service the mining industry in the Cariboo region during the 1930s and 40s. The museum's CF-AOD, as seen here, was the 6th of 12 Fleet 2s of the first production run. It was succeeded by the Fleet Model 7, which was built for the military as a training aircraft. Republic CB. The CB is a high-wing amphibious aircraft first built in 1946. It was ideal for those who enjoyed flying at remote lakes or equally hard-to-reach saltwater inlets. It was the first all-metal amphibious aircraft ever produced for the civilian market. It was a low-powered, slow, and noisy. It was a lot of fun for those who enjoyed fishing or camping out in the way of places. Leonardo da Vinci Ornithopter. Around 1485, the famous Italian artist, inventor, and scientist, Leonardo da Vinci, turned his mind to human flight. His notebooks contain designs for ornithopters, human-powered machines that use flapping wings to achieve flight. While the designs proved impractical, this was one of the earliest expressions of man's interest in flight.
It's probably the size of man.
It looks like the height of that.
Chinook glider. In 1896, Octave Chinook, an American civil engineer of French descent, designed, built, and flew a glider that was to revolutionize heavier-than-air flight. It did so by having the upper surface of the wing curve, which caused the air passing over it to speed up, thus creating lift. The wing was also constructed so that it also provided lateral stability. For those inventions, and for sharing information on heavier-than-air planes, Chinook was called the father of flying machines. Lighter-than-air balloons. The modern balloon basket represents the earliest aerial aircraft. On July 20th, 1871, the first unmanned hot air balloon ascent in Western Canada took place in Victoria, BC, just weeks after the colony joined Canada. The first human flights in British Columbia occurred in June 1880 at Victoria and Nanaimo, thanks to the barnstorming troupe called Professor Leclerc. Thereafter, balloon ascents often headlined fairs and special events. Some have included trapeze acts and parachute descents. I don't know about you, but I feel like going into a wicker basket high in the sky without any parachutes takes a lot of courage. Trident TR-1 Trigal. The Trigal was a Canadian amphibious aircraft that was designed and produced to replace the older Republic CB. The Trigal featured a high wing and push propeller like the CB, but differed noticeably in many other areas. It has a fully retractable tricycle undercarriage and wing floats which retract up to make wingtips. These features combined to make the Trigal more streamlined with significantly less drag than the CB. It also had a more powerful 285 horsepower engine, giving the aircraft a much better cruising speed. Newport 17. The Newport 17 was a French-built single-seat World War I fighter aircraft. It was highly maneuverable and had a high rate of climb, which gave it significant advantage over opposing aircraft of the day. However, it had a rotary engine which, although lighter than conventional engines, had a gyroscopic effect that made the aircraft difficult to handle when landing or taking off when in the hands of an inexperienced pilot.
These are pictures of this Lancaster. It was built during the end of World War II, and it flew to England, and it was held in reserve, and then the war ended. so it didn't get into combat. It never dropped a bomb in anger. So it came back to Canada, and the Cold War started, and it was converted to a maritime patrol aircraft, this configuration. After it was retired from the Air Force, the city of Toronto got a hold of it, and they repainted it and restored it to the Second World War colors. And they mounted it on a pillar or plinth where it sat for a few decades. And then the museum here got a hold of it just 2 or 3 years ago. And it's going to be restored back to this configuration.
Oh, really?
But it got in pretty bad shape sitting outside like this. The elements, and it was scavenged and vandalized. Pieces went missing. But come on in here, I'll Peter's in here. But,
Wowie.
it's going to, this is the front portion of it right here.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's
Would it be airworthy?
no,
It's
no,
just
they made
okay.
the decision last year, the final decision. When they first got it, they were hoping to restore it.
Right, yes.
There's only 2 in the world flying.
Who gets the say on if it's going to fly or not?
Well, the board had the final say.
Oh, the
And
AV.
it was a decision that, some members did not agree with, but a lot of it's just the financial of it. Where's this engine? It's a Merlin engine. Rolls-Royce was the initial designer. These ones are Packard Merlins, made by the Packard car company in the U.S. V12, very powerful, very good engine. There's a couple of companies down the States that will restore these and recertify them for flight. It's $250,000 per engine. So that's $1 million right there just for the engines. And that they have to be recertified every year or two. How many hundreds of hours or whatever. Just financially, for a little museum like us, it just was impossible unless we had some billionaire write a check for $10 million or something. It just wasn't going to happen. But it's going to be restored as a very nice museum piece. And they hope, just through volunteer labor, just to get one of these engines running. And it'll be mounted on a stand, and it'll be fired up every now and then with a cut-down propeller. It won't be attached to the airframe, just for the sound and the feel of it starting up. But it was in quite bad condition. When they mounted it on that pillar in Toronto, they literally took a blowtorch beforehand and cut a big hole in the bottom and mounted it on that pillar. So it was, it's 80 years old, and it had been used hard and then left outside and abused. It could have been done. Anything can be done if you have enough money, but we don't. And it's still going to take 10 years to restore it to look like a museum piece.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And how many hours? How many years have you put into it?
3.
So okay.
So it's going to take every piece. And this is one of the old fuel tanks. I don't, other than a new coat of paint, it won't a whole lot. And there's 6 fuel tanks like this in the aircraft.
They were all in the wing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they put the fuel. Yeah.
And the bomb bay would start from right there all the way back. It was basically a flying bomb bay. It could carry 20,000 pounds of munitions, bombs, and so on.
So even without bombs, it could be a really good transport aircraft.
Well, after the war, they converted some of them. They called it a Lancastrian. They converted them to passenger aircraft.
I see. Yeah.
It wasn't real good. It was unpressurized. It could only carry about 8 or 10 passengers. But some of them were. I don't know if they were ever converted to cargo. Not that I know of. But these were, in the 50s, the Canadian Air Force used them for maritime patrol. Both oceans and the Arctic. They fly over the Arctic.
I feel like they'd make good water bombers.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know a lot of Second World War bombers were used. We've got one outside which was a medium bomber that was converted, and not so much a water bomber, but they dropped the retardant, the fire retardant. You know, you'd have to land at an airport, have that pumped in, where the water bombers are mainly the amphibious that scoop up the water.
This is truly amazing. And is it all volunteers?
Yeah.
And anyone can volunteer?
Yep.
Oh, so they'll find something for you to do.
Yeah. And a lot of the volunteers that are working in here, Tuesday and Thursdays are the big day. We have about 24 volunteers in here working on the airframe.
I see. So you do work on the aircraft Tuesdays and Thursdays, basically.
Yeah. And a lot of them are retired aircraft maintenance engineers or have worked in the industry.
Right.
But it is, they just in the last couple of months got the landing gear reattached here. These struts were all rebuilt and refurbished. The original old tire, well, this tire is from the 1950s.
Oh, really?
It's a little different than the Second World War one. But, and this is the main wing strut, the inside of the wing.
So how do you find parts that are missing? Do you just go online or?
Well, it's tough. When this aircraft was donated here, it was supposed to come with more parts than what it did. And I was saying how, I don't know if you can bend down here. Well, this was the part that was all cut out. And they're replacing all these struts. There's one there, laying there. But all this has to be, I mean, it's just metal that's been shaped. You know, I-beam type bars. This is an old piece of the original. Yeah, there's another big section, it's in the other hangar, of the outer wing that attaches, you know, to these big giant bolts here. And it was constructed so you could take it apart rather quickly if something was damaged.
No, that makes sense.
This fuselage part fits in here, right there.
So this part attaches here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And these two are the two inboard engine mounts. They have 4 engines. This one has been restored. And the other one is the original, how it looked. And the engine would attach just these 4 bolts. And this is behind here is a big oil tank.
To pump the oil so it would
Within
continue to
the
lubricate
engine.
it.
It would burn this much oil in a mission.
Really?
Yeah. And this is the original.
That was really cool to learn. What an amazing story that Lancaster's been through. Piet and Pole Air Camper. The Air Camper is a simple parasail wing, single engine, single seat, home built aircraft of the late 1920s. It was designed to be built of spruce, plywood, and fabric. It was also low cost and easy to construct by the average home builder. The Model A Ford engine was the standard power plant, but the position of the radiator severely restricted the pilot's forward view. The Piet and Pole Air Camper was popular and easy to fly with few bad habits, making it a favorite with amateur enthusiasts. Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A. The SE-5A was a British-built fighter aircraft that came into service in March 1917. It was fast, stable, and maneuverable, making it an excellent fighter aircraft. It had 2 machine guns, one on the cowl in front of the pilot, which was synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. The other was a top wing-mounted Lewis gun, which could also be aimed to shoot straight up. These 2 machine guns made the aircraft into a highly efficient fighter. Auster Op 6. The Auster Op 6 is an Army observation aircraft. OP stands for Air Observation Post. The Auster was based on the Taylorcraft design and manufactured by Taylorcraft Aircraft, England Limited. It featured a high wing, airfoil flaps, and carried a pilot and an observer. A total of 1604 Austers were built, of which Canada acquired 36. The Auster was used by the Canadian Army during the Korean War, and all were retired in 1958. Captain Peter Tees of Vancouver, BC, was awarded the Last Distinguished Flying Cross awarded by the Canadian military for flying the Auster in Korea. Hoffer H-1. The Hoffer H-1 was a single-engine, two-seat, float-equipped biplane. It was built in Vancouver by Henry and James Hoffer. Although the Hoffers were boat builders, they constructed the first Canadian seaplane to fly west of Toronto. The aircraft first flew in 1917 and was the first to carry a passenger over Vancouver. Unfortunately, the H-1 later hit a deadhead while landing and had to be scrapped. The museum's Hoffer H-1 is a full-size replica manufactured by museum volunteers. Gibson twin plane. The twin plane was an aircraft designed, built, and first flown by William Wallace Gibson on September 8, 1910. The twin plane was the first all-Canadian aircraft to fly in Canada, and there's a plaque commemorating the event at Lansdowne Field next to Lansdowne Middle School in Saanich. Not only did Gibson build the aircraft, but he also designed and built the first Canadian aircraft engine. The engine is on permanent display at the Canadian National Air and Space Museum in Ottawa.
Airmail on the West Coast.
De Havilland Tiger Moth. The Tiger Moth is a single-engine, tandem-seat biplane with a conventional undercarriage. It is made primarily of wood and fabric. A total of 8,850 Tiger Moths were produced. 1,550 of those were built by de Havilland Canada Ltd. For the RCAF during the Second World War. The Tiger Moth was a mainstay of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, where it was used for elementary flying training instruction. Today, more than 300 Tiger Moths remain in flying condition around the world, 40 of them in Canada. During the early post-war years, the Victoria Flying Club operated Tiger Moths from its location on the Victoria International Airport. Aviation. The Anson was designed in the 1930s as a British twin-engine maritime reconnaissance aircraft. It saw service for a short while in that role, but with the outbreak of the Second World War, the aircraft was found to be obsolete in any frontline role. It then became a twin-engine training aircraft. The Avro Anson was produced in large numbers, with 8,138 being produced in Great Britain and a further 2,882 produced under license in Canada. Ford Model T. The Model T was produced from October 1st, 1908 until May 26, 1927. More than 15 million Model Ts were produced, and it is generally regarded as the first affordable automobile due to Ford's assembly line production method. For the first time, middle-class Americans could afford to buy a car. The Ford Model T was voted the most influential car of the 20th century by the 1999 Car of the Century competition, ahead of such rivals as the BMC Mini and the Volkswagen Beetle. Bristol Bolingbroke. The Bolingbroke was a twin-engine light bomber ground attack and maritime patrol aircraft. The Bolingbroke was Canada's version of the British Bristol Blindheim Mark IV, built under license by Fairchild Aircraft Canada Ltd. of Longueuil, Quebec. A total of 676 Bolingbrokes were built by Fairchild, and the aircraft saw widespread use on both the east and west coast of Canada as a maritime patrol / anti-submarine and training aircraft. Scorpion II. The Scorpion II is a single-engine, single-rotor, two-person kit helicopter. It was designed initially by B.J. Schramm of the Schramm Aircraft Company. It was then marketed in kit form by Rotorway Aircraft Inc. The Scorpion II was designed for the sports aviation and home-built enthusiasts. Initial versions suffered badly from vibration, which was later corrected by changing the engine to a Rotorway RW133. Falconer AMF 14H Miranda. The Miranda is a conventional high-wing kit aircraft designed by Falconer Avia of Edmonton, Alberta. The Falconer Miranda was developed from the heavier AMFS 14 Super Miranda, the Canadian basic ultralight class, and for the U.S. light sport aircraft category. The aircraft is designed to be constructed at home by amateurs and is primarily built of wood and fabric with a conventional undercarriage. Plans for the aircraft are currently available from Mana Aviation. Harvard. The Harvard is a single-engine, tandem-seat advanced training aircraft. It was originally designed in 1935 by North American Aviation. Canadian Harvards were built under license by Nordian Aviation and Canadian Car and Foundry. Together, the two companies built a total of 3,350 for the RCAF and RAF during and following the Second World War. The Harvard was a mainstay of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan and continued to serve as a NATO trainer well into the 1960s. Many Harvards are still flying today in the hands of private owners and are regularly seen at air shows. Can you catch the first cable? Yes, I can. Perfect. Vickers Viscount. First flown in 1948, the Viscount was the world's first turboprop-powered pressurized commercial airliner. The museum's Viscount entered service with TransCanada Airlines, now Air Canada, in early 1955. It quickly became a passenger favorite due to it being pressurized, having large roomy seats, panoramic windows, and little vibration. During the airliner's operating life, the Viscount became one of the most successful and profitable of all the post-war commercial aircraft. The Viscount's last flight into Victoria was in April 1973.
This is the very first airplane I was ever on as a kid.
Oh.
So this is in the late 50s, early 60s. And this was like space age. This is the very first pressurized all aluminum turboprop airliner anywhere. Before that, you'd be flying in DC-3s, slow, low. This thing is just like modern. It was like zooming 50 years ahead. So even nowadays, flying this thing is just like the modern ones. It would still make money, way ahead of its time. Do you have a special interest in flying, or like a pilot? Or
no, just like
You're normal.
curious, just
That's good.
normal, yeah.
No, I always ask because it gives me an idea how much depth I can go
Yes,
into. Because
knowledge, yes, you have to
sometimes
share.
pilots are interested in the controls because they're actually 60s vintage controls, but that's what I'm used to, and it's a lot simpler than it looks.
This is amazing.
Yeah. Well, back then, it was meant to attract people to fly rather than take the train. The meals were fabulous. They were hot. It was all part of the deal. It was comfortable, very luxurious compared to nowadays where you're treated like cattle.
Yeah.
Back then, it was something special. Like the bathrooms are huge, but you can see that everything is pretty much like modern. It's set the standards. Like drop-down trays, that was the first. And they're still using them. So there's not that many seats, but there's 6 exits. So this is where things are a little different. I would still, if you were assigned a seat by the exit, I'd tell you as flight attendant how to open the window and get out. But first you'd get the emergency rope out.
Okay.
Tie it to the seat, throw it out the window, and you're first out and everybody follows.
Wow.
Wow.
And then, of course, this is open. Back then, every public place smoking was allowed. So there's your ashtray.
Oh, yeah.
I had my first adult the other day, didn't know what it was, which is a good sign of the times.
Wow.
Curtains, big windows. So this would fly at the same altitude as modern planes. It's a huge jump, you know, and considering this is a 7-year-old airplane, that's amazing. It would still make money. And they're still flying.
They are?
Yep.
So who is the manufacturer of this plane?
This is a Vickers Viscount. So it's a
Okay.
British company, but it was made in Canada on license from Vickers.
Okay.
Now, if you're a good Canadian, you'll recognize that this is actually a Hudson's Bay blanket. That TCA, which became Air Canada, had contracted from Hudson's Bay and put their logo on it. And this is what you would get if you needed a blanket in flight. Compare that with what they get now. Oh, and let's say you had an infant with you. Well, the flight attendant would give you this accessory that would clip on here, little net. They could go in that right above you, at least until you hit some turbulence and then and fly out. Safety's not changed a little bit. Programs to get a commercial helicopter license, they subsidize it, so you can get it really inexpensively. And I should have done it, but I didn't.
Still that program is existing?
No, I don't do that anymore.
Aerospatial Alouette 3. The Alouette 3 is a single rotor light helicopter with a capacity for the pilot and up to 6 passengers. The Alouette 3 was developed by the French aerospace company Sud Aviation. The helicopter was used by civilian, military, and Coast Guard organizations around the world. The helicopter can be equipped with a hoist to lift personnel or cargo from sites too difficult for a landing.
Until we get around to rebuilding this, the rest of it's in the restoration hall that we're working on.
Yeah, I took a look at that part already.
Good.
Where did you guys pick up the
Toronto was on a pedestal on display.
And here's the rest of the Lancaster. Avro Lancaster. The Lancaster is a British-designed 4-engine heavy bomber of World War II. Fame. The museum's Lancaster, designated FM 104, was one of the 430 built in Canada by Victory Aircraft of Malton, Ontario. It was flown to England in January 1945, but never went into action. It was returned to Canada in June 1945. The Lancaster was then converted to a maritime reconnaissance aircraft and later assumed a search and rescue role. Upon retirement, FM 104 was acquired by the City of Toronto and displayed on a pylon where it remained for 34 years. And now it's here. So they plan on putting it back into its maritime, the paint job it had when it was a maritime search and rescue plane, but it's never going to fly again. They had a vote and they decided just to have it as a display plane. So right now there are two planes, two Lancasters that are flying. One's in Ontario in Hamilton, another one's in the UK, and they're getting another one in the UK ready to be flown. So there is hope if you want to fly in a Lancaster before they're all gone.
It can have speed, it can have floats. It could carry 6 passengers. And I forget, somebody was telling me the other day, these 50 gallons of rum. And
Norden Norseman. The Norseman is a high-wing single-engine bush plane designed to operate on wheels, skis, or floats. It was purposely designed and built by Robert Norden for year-round operation in the rugged Canadian backcountry. The Norseman was the first Canadian designed and built aircraft to be sold internationally. It was also a car by the military in 8 countries. The United States Army Air Forces designated the Norseman the UC-64. Stinson Reliant SR-9E. The Reliant SR-9E is a rare 1930s classic aircraft, of which only 43 were built. Stinson built a total of 1,327 Reliant of all models. The SR-9E is a single-engine, high-gull-wing conventional undercarriage, light aircraft manufactured by the Stinson Aircraft Company of Wayne, Michigan. Later model Reliants, of which the museum's is one, were nicknamed Gullwing. This is because it has a maximum chord and thickness at mid-wing range. At mid-wing, which when looked at from the front gives the wing the appearance of a seagull. Yeah, I can see that. Lincoln Sport. The Lincoln Sport is a single-seat biplane that was designed for the home-built and sports flying market of the 1920s. It was designed by Sven Swanson for the Lincoln Aircraft Company of Lincoln, Nebraska, and was offered in kit form or as a fully assembled aircraft. With its small 35 horsepower Inzani engine, it could achieve a speed of 100 miles an hour. The Great Depression saw the end of the Lincoln Aircraft Company, but the few aircraft that continue to exist are in great demand by collectors. Looks like a Spitfire. Now that's a glider. Believe it or not, I flew a glider once when I was in Air Cadets. It was a lot of fun. CT-133 Silver Star. The Silver Star is a low-wing single-jet engine advanced training aircraft developed from the American Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star. Canada's CT-133s, known affectionately as T-Birds, were built under license by Canadair Ltd, and a total of 656 were built. It was in service from 1952 until 2002 and was used primarily as an advanced pilot training aircraft and for gunnery practice. The Canadian CT-133 differed from its American counterpart due to the slightly more powerful Rolls-Royce Nene jet engine. This is so cool. What an amazing experience at the Aircraft Museum. Well, thank you for watching another Dane Leask adventure, and I'll be very happy to bring you another adventure real soon.